But when we write a letter, it's very different. The minute we write dear mom, dear dad, dear Uncle Bob, whoever, dear so and so, we're automatically in our minds focused on that person. And that's a completely different relationship now than just letting thoughts pour out of us.
Mm.
And what I certainly found writing letters was that, it connected me with memories.
On Power Ace Radio.
Okay, so hello everybody. Welcome to another episode of PAR Real Talk. This is Power Ace Radio. My name is Pali, and I will be the host of the show. And I have an amazing guest on the show. So if I could get you to please introduce yourself, tell us your name, tell us where you're from, and tell us what you do, please.
All right. Thank you very much. First of all, I'm very grateful to be here. So thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Helen Fernald. I am a grief recovery author, and I teach the therapeutic art of letter writing. And this is a journey that I've been on for 25 years. It's been at times, of course, very hard because it has to do with grief, but also rather miraculous in many ways. And I can tell you my story in a little bit more depth, but just to get to the point of the conversation, it's really about grief and what I've learned about grief, because honestly, I didn't really know anything. And how I have learned that grief can be so challenging, but that grief is very real. And that when we actually befriend our grief, then our grief can become an extraordinary blessing. We can learn deep compassion. What I've also realized is that grief really is a uniting factor for all human beings. And there's not a lot that we can say that about that. But grief connects us all because there is no adult that gets away without at least some grief in some nature. Of course, grief can be the loss of a very dear person in our lives. But grief comes also from, it could be the loss of a pet, it could be the loss of a job, a dream, of hope, of our health, of our home. It can be from so many things because for me, what I've realized over all of these years of thinking about grief is that grief comes, of course, when we have loved someone or something. But we are, in essence, human beings are animals. And what we really most seek is safety in this life. And when we love someone or a job or whatever it may be, that person or that thing brings us a sense of safety. And when we lose that sense of safety, there is a little child inside of us that's having a little temper tantrum and stamping his feet or her feet and saying, it's not fair. I don't like it. It's not fair. And at least in the United States, I feel like I don't think this is true in a lot of other countries, but at least in the United States, I feel that we have lost the ability to deal with grief. We are basically taught that we're just supposed to push it all down inside and pretend everything's fine. But what I've learned, and there certainly is plenty of data, scientific research about this, is that when we don't honor our grief, we can end up very often either very depressed, very ill, or very angry. And
Mm.
if you look at the state of the United States right now, you will see a tremendous amount of all of those things. Now, I'm not saying it's all because of grief, but I feel like, particularly with the pandemic, people lost so much, but especially that sense of hope and community, which is essential for human beings. And I don't think we've ever recuperated that. And so the longer we keep pushing down, and I know this because I was taught to push down my grief. I'm an expert at that. I spent years pushing down my grief, and then I fell apart, like so many people do. And then 25 years ago, I got in this remarkable path where I understood that I needed to begin to really embrace my grief. And the idea just came to me to write letters to my mother. So I sat down and started writing letters, and I actually wrote letters to my mother for 8 years. And now, I'm an older person from an older generation. I was taught to write letters in school. I actually, when I thought about it, I realized that from the time I was 18, when I left for college, until the age of 68, when my brother died very suddenly, I used to write letters weekly to my family. So I've literally written thousands of letters in my life. So when the idea came to me, I thought, oh, well, I can do that. But what I found was that I just grabbed a notebook and a pen. And when I would write, just writing those letters, all I had to do was write, Dear Mom. And I could feel all these emotions come up. And I think so many of us, when we have grief, we think to ourselves, I certainly did. I thought to myself, if I start crying, I will never stop. So I can't start. But those letters allowed me to begin to just, I think I sobbed through 98% of those letters. But every time I would finish the letter and I would write, Love Helen, I would feel so completely different.
Mm,
And it was just such a remarkable experience. And after 8 years of writing letters to my mother, what I actually realized was that not only could I accept the loss of my mother, but also I felt a true renewed joy, not just smack a smile on your face, everything's okay, but a true joy and zest for life. And I also actually created a whole new loving connection with my mother, which was I wasn't expecting any of that, but it was such a remarkable experience. And so I'm a teacher. I've taught for 50 years, and I'm very passionate about sharing this message because I think we need to learn how to grieve again.
mm,
And there are obviously many, many techniques, but I think a very old technique, certainly I did not obviously invent the idea of writing letters, but it's a very old technique that people have lost. And it's just a remarkable way to move through grief on our own. I certainly always, when I hear of somebody who has lost somebody, I always suggest they find a counselor. I had phenomenal counselors, but it was really the writing of the letters just between me and my mother that was
mm.
really the most healing piece of my journey.
Wow, that is a full round answer. Really, really like that. And let me kind of take it bit by bit.
Yes,
So this letters we're talking about is actually taking pen to paper
yes,
and writing to somebody that is no longer there.
right.
So so this idea is packed up through your mother, passing away, God rest her soul, and you're using now your personal emotions to teach others how to grieve.
Hmm.
Do you believe everyone carries as you call a closet of emotions? And how
Mm.
do we recognize this? And
Mm.
you know,
Mm.
how do we recognize these emotions? And how do we deal with it?
I think that's a wonderful question. Obviously, I can't speak for everyone, but I believe in general that we humans have so many emotions. And as I said before, at least in this country, we are not really taught to express all of those emotions. There's a lot of judgment around emotions. There are the good emotions like the happy and the nice and the smiley. And then there are those dark emotions like anger and depression and sadness and grief. And we tend to run away from those. And what I realized was that there we can't judge them. They are all of equal value because they are all here to teach us something. And it's not like the light ones, the happy ones are the good ones, and the dark ones are the bad ones. There's no judgment. They're all just human emotions. And I think you're so wise because to ask those questions because again, we're not taught to really honor them. And, we're told not to be sad, not to be, not to whine, not to cry, not to, I grew up with my mother telling me all those things, not because she was a mean mother. My mother was phenomenal, but that's what she was taught. I mean, I've thought a lot about this, about when there might have been a shift in this, because I think people used to really honor their emotions and used to really grieve. I don't know. I think about my own parents who grew up not only in the Depression, but in World War II. And I know that in those times, life was so hard for them. And especially, for example, my mother was here in the United States, my father was on the front lines in Europe. They had to be strong. They couldn't just fall apart every time something happened, or they never would have made it. So I don't really know if that's what it is about, but I know that my mother was like, "Oh, don't cry. It's okay. Everything will be fine." Kind of that reassurance, which is lovely, but doesn't always really help us when we're facing something that's challenging. So I think that, whenever we feel like we're sort of up and down. Like one minute we're just all happy and, I can be standing in nature and everything's great, or having, a cup of coffee with your friend and you're just chatting. And then, if you suddenly feel yourself angry or frustrated about different things, then, maybe it's time to recognize that you're just fully human and you have all of these emotions. As I said before, for me, working with counselors, I worked with very counselors over the years, and that was just very transformative for me as well, to help me really identify those emotions. And what I do think is a real gift of our world today, at least in the United States, I'm guessing probably in Europe also, is this whole movement toward mindfulness and meditation, because I think that mindfulness and meditation can help us to really recognize our feelings and, not just spew them out with anger, but to really, understand them and become kinder and gentler. And again, I think that that's something that we are so missing in our world today in general. I certainly feel in the United States, but that we have lost that ability to stop and think before we speak. You've got the social media, which I personally really enjoy. Actually, I'm also a photographer, so I post all the time, just beautiful nature, because I think we all need beautiful nature. But I hear about a lot of the bullying and how, people can be so mean because there's no repercussion. You're not standing in front of the person being mean. You're just writing something rude. And so people have become accustomed to that. And personally, I don't think that's very helpful to anybody. I think what we really need to do is to somehow go back to this sense of we are all community. We are all human beings living in a world community, and we need to learn to be nice to each other and to be compassionate. Above all, to be compassionate to one another. And I think, again, that that's one of the extraordinary gifts when we befriend our grief, is that I realized that my mother was always very busy. And sometimes I resented that growing up. But when I sat down and wrote all those letters, I would finish a letter and think, wow, no wonder she was so busy. She was helping this person. She was helping this person. This person was sick. She was working full time. No wonder she didn't have any time. And by the end of those 8 years, I had such compassion for my mother, such a completely different understanding. I think that unless we do something like that, most of us are sort of stuck. There's always a little child within us. And that's how we view our parents. Unless we really can do a lot of inner work or writing letters or whatever it takes to really understand that. But I feel like the compassion that I had for my mother was a compassion that I had for myself, and just a deep compassion that I have now for the world and for everyone who's struggling. You read so many quotes, but I think it's so true. We never have any clue as to what the person next to us is going through, because in general, they're probably not going to talk about it. So we never have any clue, but we can be pretty sure that probably 98% of the people that we see are struggling with something. So again, I think that's a gift. I just wanted to say something also about writing the letters. I know that journaling is a very popular way and certainly anything that helps us get our emotions out is very valid. What I realized about writing letters that's very different from journaling is when we're journaling, because I've done journaling, we're just letting those thoughts come out from us and we're just writing. But when we write a letter, it's very different. The minute we write dear mom, dear dad, dear Uncle Bob, whoever, dear so-and-so, we're automatically in our minds focused on that person. And that's a completely different relationship now than just letting thoughts pour out of us.
Mm.
And what I certainly found writing letters was that, it connected me with memories. I think so often when we go through traumas, personally, the four people that I grew up with, who were my great uncle Stan, who was like a grandfather, and then my mother, my father, and my brother, every single one of them died very suddenly. There was no goodbye. One moment they were here, one moment they were gone.
Mm.
So for me, that was very, there was a lot of trauma involved in that. Now, we all have our different experiences. I think they're all traumatic. I'm just talking about mine individually because I feel like I realized that I had blocked out so much of my childhood, and I had a lovely childhood. I just blocked it out because of all that trauma.
Mm.
But writing those letters to my mother eh, helped free up the really happy memories. And that also was such an incredible gift.
Wow, that is really, really incredible. I love the way you break things down. Um,
Thank you.
she said, well, you're a teacher,
Yeah.
so teaching not something there. Um, Something else to kind of maybe teach us would be, we've heard about the letters and, especially with our new generations, they know how to text, they probably don't know how to
Mm,
paper,
mm,
but there's one thing in common that some people will think like, okay, well, I don't know what to say. So
mm.
for these people that don't know what to say in these letters, how do we go about it, especially to
I think
maybe?
that's a great question. I want to just back up one moment before I get to that question, because you talked about how, the younger generations, nobody writes letters anymore. And, everybody does texting, which is for me just like really short. And, or, they might write a little longer email, but I think in general, everything is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So the first thing that I want to say about that is that there is so much scientific evidence that when we write with the hand, particularly with cursive, which isn't even taught sometimes in today's world, but when we write with the hand, it actually allows the emotions, this proven scientifically, the emotions to come out, go through our hand onto the paper, and that's how we free them. That is not true if you're using any kind of a computer or even in the old days, the typewriters. If you are just using that, there's not a connection whatsoever. So, I'm certainly not going to, if somebody wants to text someone who's passed or someone wants to send emails, whatever they're going to do to try to deal with their emotions is fabulous. But I do think it's an important point that, again, we have lost, I think, in general in the world, is that ability to actually write by hand because it's also slower. It takes a while for you to do that. I mean, I just happen to be a really good typer, so I type really fast, but it doesn't allow me to, really process what I'm typing necessarily. Whereas writing by longhand gives you, and then you put the pen down and then, you kind of wait. But so to get back to your question of how do we know what to say, I think that's a brilliant question because honestly, before I sat down before every letter, I I had no idea what I was going to say. Never. I personally would just suddenly feel this urge to write a letter to my mother. And so I would just very quickly, I always had a couple of notebooks just sitting around. I never made it fancy. I just had notebooks. I would just grab a notebook and grab a pen and just start writing. And I think what people would find to their great surprise was that they actually had something to say. They just didn't realize it. And there's nothing wrong. For example, when I teach about this, I teach it's a great thing to have a little. Now, I didn't personally use this because I didn't need it, but I could see how having a little sacred ritual could be very helpful. Light a candle. Maybe, just pause for a minute or put your hands on your heart and take a couple of breaths and think about the person that you're going to write letters to. And the minute you think about that person, I can guarantee you will have thoughts, you will have memories, and some of them will not be good. And that's okay too. I think that it's important to understand that when we're writing letters to someone, now obviously I chose in my book, Love Helen, to publish my letters because I'm a teacher. But what I always tell people is that when you are writing letters, this is just strictly between you and that other person. And it doesn't matter whether you believe that other person will ever read those letters or somehow through the veil will understand. None of that makes any difference, really, because none of us know anything about that, really. I mean, we all can have our own theories, but concretely, scientifically, no. But basically, writing the letters is for your benefit, not for the benefit of the person beyond. And when I do teach, I do think it is good to have, I don't know, are you familiar with tapping, the world of tapping, which is also called the emotional freedom technique? It's a body mind technique, which I'm certified in. I've studied and used for over 20 years. But it's a way of being like what you're literally doing is it's a combination of the modern, I'm not going to teach it to you, but it's a combination of modern Western psychology with the ancient Chinese acupressure points. So you're tapping on these points, but it allows you to say, this memory makes me really mad. This memory makes me really mad. This memory. So you don't blow up about it. You can deal with it. And then after you've done the technique, then you go back and you say, okay, now I feel okay about it. Now I can write about it. Now I can feel okay about it. So I feel for me, when I teach about this, it's important to both let people know how to do a ritual, but also how to address their emotions because they will. There will be a lot of emotions. And as I say, I remember my mother was just such a wonderful person. Everybody loved my mother. She was just outgoing, happy, cheerful. So honestly, for me, the most difficult part was dealing with my anger. And I was angry because she just left so suddenly. Just one day she was here and I was only 40 years old and she was gone. And that's such a normal reaction. But there is one letter where I say, Mom, this is the hardest letter I have to write because this is talking about my anger toward you. And then but allowing myself to actually write about that was incredibly freeing because anger is complex. We can feel angry, but then we feel guilty about feeling angry because we really shouldn't be angry. So you got all these emotions that are rolling around inside of us, and it's really complicated. But if we can allow ourselves to write about these emotions, knowing that no one ever has to know about what we wrote. I mean, you can burn all your letters if you want. None of that makes any difference. But I just think that, so in answer to your question, that was a very long answer, but in answer to your question, it is simply that the minute you write that name and pause and think about that person, you will have something to say. Or, if nothing comes to you, just say, something like, Dear Mom, I guess I'm okay today. Love, in my case, love Helen. And then, don't give up on it. Definitely don't give up on it. Sometimes I think, anytime we're trying something new, it can take a while for us to really warm up, for us to feel free enough to honor our emotions. Because again, we're not taught to do that. And there's that voice in the head that says, oh, your dad said, don't ever do that. Your mom said, don't ever do that. I personally understand that totally because in my house, we weren't even supposed to talk about the family beyond the house. And here I am, sending this book to the publisher that's all of these deep feelings. And I really had to work with my own counselor on that just to get up the courage to do that. But again, most people don't have to do that. Most people just can never have anybody read their letters.
Mm. Wow. That is it's a full answer. I love it. I love it a lot. Thank you so much. Wealth of wisdom. And, we're here talking about your book, Letter to My Mother.
Yes.
Like creating a loving connection after loss.
Yeah.
And just while we're here, 'cause time is going, if you could, do you have any? If people want to get in touch with you? Do you have a website? Do you have social media?
Thank you. Yes, I do have a website, which is just my name, helenfernald.com. I also have a blog because I've continued to write monthly letters to my mother. So I think people enjoy just going on and reading my letters. I'm also very active on Facebook, just under Helen Fernald, and on Instagram under Helen Fernald. So I'm very active on all of those, although basically sometimes I post things about that, but more I just on social media, I just am very passionate about sharing the beauty of the area where I live and sharing a little positive note that goes with this. But I would like to just mention very quickly one other thing that I'm very passionate about. When I first was looking into publishing my book, I did a little research and I discovered that in the state of New Hampshire, there is this extraordinary nonprofit organization that is called Friends of Anya, AINE.com. And it was started by a couple who had two young children, and the oldest child had some sort of a heart defect or something. And she died when she was only 8. And of course, the parents were heartbroken. But their greatest concern was with their younger daughter, and they didn't know how to help her. So they created this extraordinary, I think this was probably about 10 or 15 years ago, this extraordinary nonprofit. They have classes. They have classes for kids from, I think, 3 years old to 18 years old who are grieving, who have had a loss. They help the parents. They have classes for the parents. And I'm telling you this because I'm so passionate about what they are doing. And part of everything that I earn from my book, from any speeches that I give, from everything that I earn will go back to that nonprofit because I just think they're doing such important work. I think that when we can help children with who are grieving, then we really can change the world because they are our future. So
Perfect. So Helen as in HELEN and
yes.
FERNALD.
Thank you. Yes. And as I always say, the name of the book is just Love, comma, Helen, which was how I signed all my letters. So it's an easy name to remember. And of course, the book is on Amazon. So
Perfect, perfect, perfect. And I just want to ask this one other question, kind of looking forward and looking at the bigger picture. So, this one is like writing letters about grieving. Do you expect or do you hope that this catches on to maybe writing other type of letters? Maybe divorce, maybe unresolved conflicts, maybe estrangements,
yeah, no,
miscarriage.
I love that. No one has ever asked me those questions. I love that. I feel that letter writing, yes, yes, yes. I love those ideas. I think that letter writing can be so helpful for any of those things. And I also will just say that, because I come from a family where we wrote to each other, one of the greatest treasures that I have is that every now and then I come across one of the letters from my father or my mother or my brother. So I am just putting it out there for any parents that they might just want to write a couple of letters to their kids because I bet their kids will hang on to those letters and really appreciate them after their parents are gone. So I'm so grateful that I have those memories. And I have certainly written letters to my kids. Whether they save them or not, I don't know. But anyway, I think I love that idea. I think that's a fabulous idea because it's getting off of our chests, literally, what we feel. And that frees us up to be compassionate and kind people.
Wow, I like that. And the letter to the kids, I think I might take that on the board myself.
Good
But
job.
so
Someday they will appreciate it.
someday they will. And as we're kind of wrapping up, what advice would you give anybody that is, going through grief, and or people that are supporting somebody that is going
Yes.
through grief?
I think that, for example, I have a dear friend whose husband died, and that's why I made the connection so clearly that of the importance of befriending grief. What we need, whether it's someone else's grief or our grief. For example, with my friend, as soon as I could, I said, Mary Kay, can you come up and sit with me and let's just have a cup of tea? And I could hold her hand and just say, just talk to me about your grief. And that's really, in essence, what we need to do for ourselves also. But as I said to begin with, I think one of the best things also that people can do is certainly find a qualified counselor or a grief group There are grief groups, there are online groups, there are many things that are free now in today's world, but of value. And then, of course, write letters. That would be my suggestion.
Perfect. I love that summary. And yeah, I would just like to say, yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an immense pleasure. And yeah,
I just want to thank you so much. I loved your questions and your interest, and it was just so much fun. So thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
you're very welcome. So yeah, till we meet again, take care, Helen.
The station's awesome.
I love this station.
Power Ace Radio.